Hello students. Today in this session we will be discussing about cholinergic and anti-muscarinic drugs. Myself Sudhir Prithvi. So before going to start about complete cholinergic system, I would like to give a brief introduction about nervous system, which I told in my adrenergic class also. So nervous system is divided into two categories: central nervous system and peripheral nervous system. Central nervous system includes brain and spinal cord, and peripheral nervous system includes somatic nervous system and autonomic nervous system. Here our main concern is about autonomic nervous system. In autonomic nervous system, it is again divided into three categories: parasympathetic nervous system, sympathetic nervous system, and enteric nervous system. This enteric nervous system is present in GIT, which is also known as gut brain. And regarding sympathetic nervous system, I completed in my previous session. And today we'll be talking about parasympathetic nervous system. So these are the other names for parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system. Parasympathetic nervous system, the other name is craniosacral outflow, and sympathetic nervous system is also known as thoracolumbar outflow. So before going to start about complete cholinergic, and I would like to give a brief introduction about acetylcholine, which is a neurotransmitter in parasympathetic nervous system. So here we will talk about the synthesis of acetylcholine. So regarding the synthesis, the acetylcholine is synthesized from two things. One is choline and another one is acetyl-CoA. They both combine together with the help of choline acetyl transferase to form acetylcholine. And this acetylcholine it will release from the nerve terminal upon getting the nerve impulse, and after showing its action on acetylcholine receptors, and again it is degraded into choline and acetic acid. This choline again enters into the nerve for the resynthesis of acetylcholine, and for the degradation, the enzyme is acetylcholine esterase. See here, I told two enzymes. One is choline acetyltransferase for synthesis, and acetylcholine esterase for degradation. This is for synthesis, and this is for degradation. Uh, Next, and this is a pictorial representation for acetylcholine release and action on acetylcholine receptors. Here you see, here choline comes into the nerve terminal, and with the help of acetyl-CoA, it forms acetylcholine. And this formed acetylcholine enters into the synaptic vesicle, and it is stored in the synaptic vesicle. And when the nerve impulse comes from the nerve terminal from axon, or from the cell body to axon, this stored acetylcholine from the synaptic vesicles, it get released into the synaptic cleft. And after getting released, it act on acetylcholine receptors, which I will be dealing in next few minutes. And after acting on acetylcholine receptors, it is degraded into choline and acetate. And this choline again it enters into the nerve for the resynthesis of acetylcholine. This is what the synthesis and action of acetylcholine. That is a neurotransmitter of parasympathetic nervous system. And we'll talk about cholinergic receptors now. We completed this acetylcholine, which is a neurotransmitter, and these cholinergic receptors, I told in adrenergic receptors, it is divided into alpha and beta. Alpha again divided into alpha 1 and alpha 2, beta divided into beta 1, beta 2, beta 3. In the same way, here cholinergic receptors, it is divided into muscarinic and nicotinic. And muscarinic is again divided into five types: M1, M2, M3, M4, M5. And nicotinic, it is divided into two categories: NM and NN. NM, which is present at skeletal muscle, that is neuromuscular junction. Our function is for contraction of skeletal muscle. Um, Sorry, for the contraction of skeletal muscle. And then this NN, it is located at adrenal medulla, and then CNS and in ganglia. See, I told this muscarinic is divided into five types: one, two, three, four, five. In those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 2 and 4 comes under one category, and 1, 3, 5 comes under another category. And what are these categories? These are divided into two categories depending upon the mechanism of action. And this M2, M4 are of GI type, and M1, M3, M5 are GQ type, right? So, so next regarding this M1, M2, M3 tissue distribution. So this M1, it is present in salivary glands and enteric nerves, that is present typically it is known as neuronal type. And M2, it is typically present in heart. That's why this is known as cardinal type. M2 is also known as cardinal type. And M3, it is present on smooth muscles and salivary glands. And M4, M5 are of less importance. They are just present in CNS. So the function of N1 is for CNS excitation. And here in M2, it is of, I told it is of GI type, and it decreases heart rate, conduction, and contractility. And M3, it increases the salivary gland secretions and as well as relaxes the smooth muscles. These are the functions of uh, M, M muscarinic receptors. And coming to, I told these muscarinic receptors are divided into five categories: M1, M2, M3, M4, M5. And M2, M4 are of GI type, and M1, M3, M5 are of GQ type, which I told before. So GQ means uh, it acts via phosphatidylinositol, triphosphate or diacylglycerol, and this GI act via decreasing cyclic AMP. These are the secondary messengers. So coming to nicotinic receptor, I told these are divided into NM and NN type. This NG is also a subcategory of NN type. This NM, it acts on skeletal muscle, contraction of skeletal muscle. This NN, it is present in CNS and adrenal medulla and ganglia. It is just used for transmission of the impulses. So here we finished this acetylcholine, which is a neurotransmitter of parasympathetic nervous system, and then parasympathetic nervous system receptors. Those are cholinergic receptors, which are of muscarinic and nicotinic types. And coming to pharmacological actions, here I'll be dealing all those pharmacological actions via system wise. So in respiratory system, what are the effects of what are the effects of acetylcholine or parasympathetic nervous system on respiratory? So here in respiratory system, it produces two things. One is bronchoconstriction, another one is increased secretion of mucus from the mucosal glands. So one is bronchoconstriction and one increases secretion of mucosal glands. And then coming to heart, I told decreased rate conduction contraction with the help of M2 receptors, and this is with the help of M3 receptors. And coming to blood vessels, it produces vasodilatation because it is also a smooth muscle. So in all smooth muscles, it produces relaxation. But if endothelium damages in the blood vessel, or if we give high doses of parasympathomimetic drugs, it produces vasoconstriction. So generally, it produces vasodilatation, but it produces vasoconstriction only in two situations where endothelium is damaged, or maybe if you give parasympathomimetic drugs in high doses. Next, coming to gastrointestinal tract, increased tone motility. That's the first one. And the second one, it is for relaxation of sphincters. So this is the main purpose for defecation. So increase the tone and motility, and then relaxation of sphincters. This was exactly opposite, which I told in adrenergic system, where I told decrease the tone and motility and contraction of sphincters, and as well as it causes increased gastric secretions with the help of M1 receptors. And then coming to urinary system, increase the contraction of detrusor muscle and relaxation of sphincter. It is for urination. So this parasympathetic nervous system is useful for defecation and as well as urination, right? And then coming to reproductive system, the main purpose of a parasympathetic nervous system in males, it is used for erection. Uh, the main mechanism for erection is through vasodilatation. And then coming to sweat glands, increases sweating. And coming to eye, here it produces four pharmacological actions. Those are meiosis, contraction of ciliary muscle, and along with meiosis and as well as contraction of ciliary muscle, it increases the outflow of aqueous humor, so leads to decreased intraocular pressure, and as well as it produces increased lacrimation. So coming to secretions, all secretions are increased. Everything in the body, whether it may be exocrine glands, whether it may be apocrine glands, whatever it may be, all secretions are increased, like lacrimal, nasopharyngeal, salivary, gastric, pancreatic, intestinal secretions. All secretions are increased through parasympathetic nervous system. And coming to ganglia, it increases neurotransmitter. It shows. increased neurotransmitter release with the help of N receptors. And coming to myoneural junction, it is useful for contraction of skeletal muscle with the help of M receptors. So for ganglia, the receptor is uh, N receptor, and here the receptor is M receptor. So these are the pharmacological actions of parasympathetic nervous system, and we'll start uh, with parasympathomimetic drugs. These are cholinergic agonists. These are of two types, directly acting and indirectly acting. Indirectly acting drugs are also known as anticholinesterases, which I will be dealing in the next 2 or 3 minutes. So first, we will concentrate about directly acting cholinergic agonists. These are of two types, choline esters and alkaloids. Choline esters, these are divided on the basis of their chemistry. So choline esters, it includes acetylcholine, betanicol, carbachol, and alkaloids. It includes pilocarpine and muscarine. So botanical, what are the, so first I told this acetylcholine, I told all the pharmacological actions of acetylcholine, but we don't have any therapeutic use of acetylcholine because of its short duration of ultra short duration of action, and as well as if we give acetylcholine through IV or through oral, it acts on all muscarinic or nicotinic receptors and produces several adverse reactions. Instead of giving therapeutic uses, it produces more severe adverse drug reactions. So that's why we don't have any uses with acetylcholine, and we have uses with the synthetic derivatives of acetylcholine. They are betanicol and carbachol. So betanicol, so it is used for it is used for bladder atony and bowel atony. So betanicol, it starts with B, so it is used for bladder B, bowel B. So it is used for bladder and bowel atony. And typically, you just remember this bowel atony, there should not be any obstruction, right? And coming to pilocarpine, from it is obtained from Pilocarpus microphilus. And then next, what are the use of pilocarpine? So we'll talk about pharmacological actions first. On topical application, it produces miosis, decreased intraocular pressure, and spasm of accommodation. The spasm of accommodation is through contraction of ciliary muscle. So, and then what are the therapeutic use of pilocarpine? These are used in, pilocarpine is used in congestive glaucoma, as a topical application is 0.1%, and increases salivary secretion. It increases the salivary secretion, so it is used in patients who are undergoing chemotherapy. Or next, it is used in inflammatory condition known as iridocyclitis in order to break the adhesions between lens and pupil. Sorry, iris. And then coming to what are the ADRs of pilocarpine, there are not that much ADRs because it is a topically used one. But if you use the pilocarpine for a long duration, it produces systemic effects, and the main systemic adverse drug reaction with pilocarpine is a pulmonary edema, which is the most dangerous one. So next coming, so here we completed this directly acting cholinergic agonist, and we will talk about this indirectly acting cholinergic agonist now, which are also known as anticholinesterases. So before talking about those drugs, I would like to give a small mechanism of action of those anticholinesterases. So we all know acetylcholine comes from nerve, and it shows its action, and later it gets degraded into choline and as well as acetic acid. The degraded enzyme is acetylcholine esterase. I told this, right? Acetylcholine esterase. What these indirectly acting drugs does means, these drugs, um, they act on acetylcholine esterase, and they inhibit the acetylcholine esterase enzyme. Sorry. So those drugs inhibit the acetylcholine esterase enzyme. Inhibit acetylcholine esterase enzyme. So what happens if we inhibit this acetylcholine esterase enzyme? This acetylcholine gets converted to some degraded products like choline and acetic acid with the help of that acetylcholine esterase enzyme. If we inhibit that acetylcholine esterase, gradually the level of acetylcholine rises. So if we increase the level of acetylcholine, it go on act on the receptors and produce the desired action. So this is the mechanism of action of those indirectly acting parasympathomimetic drugs or anticholine esterases. So what are the uses of So these are the drugs in anticholinesterases. Reversible and irreversible. Reversible drugs include physostigmine, neostigmine, pyridostigmine, edrophonium, donepezil, rivastigmine, galantamine. Irreversible, it includes two things. Carbaryl, these are carbamates, carbaryl and propoxyl. And OP compounds like parathion, malathion, tabun, sarin, soman, these are the now gases and ecothiophyte. These are the drugs which are present in indirectly acting cholinergic agonist. So we'll talk about those uses of those indirectly acting cholinergic agonists now. So what are the therapeutic use of those anticholinesterases which are of reversible type? Irreversible anticholinesterases, these phosphorus compound, they don't have any uses. They are very toxic compounds. So we have uses for only these reversible things. So what are the uses? Uh, so number one, glaucoma, cobra bite poisoning, urine poisoning, used in Alzheimer's disease, used in myasthenia gravis, and used in post-op paralytic ileus and urinary retention. So coming to one by one, first we'll talk about this glaucoma. Uh, what are the drugs used in glaucoma? What are the cholinergic agonists or parasympathomimetics used in glaucoma? Means pilocarpine and physostigmine. These are the drugs which we use topically in order to reduce the intraocular pressure in glaucoma patients. And coming to this decreurarization, and this is what my colleague she will cover in skeletal muscle relaxants. But here, as of now, I will just tell what are the drugs used for that purpose. In order to reverse the neuromuscular blocking, neostigmine and edrophonium are the drug of choice for this decreurarization. In order to reverse the neuromuscular blocking, and coming to cobra bite poisoning, these are the drugs which we use. And this cobra bite poisoning, this pathophysiology is completely similar to myasthenia gravis. And first, we'll give atropine sulfate IV, 2 to 4 milligrams, and later, after stabilizing the patient, we will give edrophonium chloride IV. And after getting stabilized, and if we see the symptoms are getting improved, then we will give IV or subcutaneous neostigmine methyl sulfate. And this is the treatment protocol for cobra bite poisoning. So here I told three drugs, that is atropine sulfate, edrophonium, and as well as neostigmine. I will tell an easy way to remember this cobra pit poisoning. We can just remember with this mnemonic like 810. So atropine, edrophonium, and neostigmine. Suppose if anybody asks you what is the treatment for cobra pit poisoning, you just remember this 810, atropine, edrophonium, and neostigmine in the same sequence which I told. And next, coming to Curer poisoning, if we give extra doses, heavy doses of those neuromuscular blocking agents, we'll use just edrophonium and neostigmine in order to reverse those effects. So we will give these reversible anticholinesterases. And coming to Alzheimer's disease, and we'll use three drugs: donepezil, rivastigmine, and galantamine. So donepezil, rivastigmine, and galantamine are the drugs which increases the acetylcholine level, which is used in Alzheimer's disease. And coming to post-op paralytic ileus or post-op urinary retention, we generally use neostigmine. But as of now, we have like many synthetic other drugs which are better than neostigmine. So we generally don't use the neostigmine. So it is rarely used now. So coming to a big thing, myasthenia gravis. This is the most important topic for you. Here I will be covering about myasthenia gravis in following headings. Number one, pathophysiology. Number two, clinical features. Number three, diagnosis. And number four, treatment. So coming to pathophysiology, what is a pathophysiology of myasthenia gravis? See, here it is a normal nerve. First one. This normal nerve, here these are the acetylcholine and these are the acetylcholine receptors. After getting the nerve impulse, acetylcholine gets released and they act on acetylcholine receptors, and transmission of transmission of nerve impulse is seen. In myasthenia gravis, here what happens means these acetylcholine receptors, they are blocked by antibodies which are produced by the lymphocytes. These antibodies come and they act on acetylcholine receptors. So there is no space for the acetylcholine to act on acetylcholine receptors. See here, already here there are uh, sufficient acetylcholine receptors. Here there are no sufficient acetylcholine receptors. So the way the acetylcholine comes, it can't act. It leads to reduced transmission. So the main mechanism is antibodies produced against the acetylcholine receptors. They come and they occupy the space uh, on acetylcholine receptors. So the released acetylcholine cannot act on acetylcholine receptors. So this is what the pathophysiology of myasthenia gravis. And then come into clinical manifestations. Muscle weakness, diplopia, weak eyelids, difficulty in speaking or smiling, difficulty in chewing or swallowing. These are the main clinical manifestations of myasthenia gravis. It starts with small muscles first, and small and rapidly, frequently using muscles, and then next it's spread to other group of muscles. And coming to diagnosis, there are many uh, uh, investigations to diagnose the myasthenia gravis. A number one blood test in order to identify the antibodies, and then coming to CT, MRI in order to detect any thymoma, any thymus abnormalities. And the main diagnosis here is edrophonium test. This edrophonium test is also known as tensilon test. This is important term for you. Just remember, edrophonium test is also known as tensilon test. You see, if you give edrophonium, uh, when we look for muscle strength, we will give edrophonium just 2 milligrams, and you look for the muscle strength. If the muscle strength is improved, this is because of myasthenia gravis. If muscle strength is not improved and it's still worsened, it leads to the reason is some other thing, maybe cholinergic crisis. So this is known as hydrophonium or test or tensilon test. We will give injection. If muscle strength improves, it is myasthenia gravis. If it is not improved, and if it is still worsened, and it is because of cholinergic crisis. And I will talk about this cholinergic crisis in my next slide. So these are the differences between myasthenia gravis or myasthenic crisis or cholinergic crisis. And these are the most important question for you. Just remember this one under the following headings. Um, it, heart rate in myasthenia gravis, there is tachycardia. In cholinergic crisis, we have bradycardia. Muscles are very weak in myasthenic crisis. In cholinergic crisis, muscles are weak and it will have fasciculations even. And coming to pupil, in myasthenia gravis, it is normal, but in cholinergic crisis, it is constricted. That is like pinpoint pupil might be seen. And coming to skin, it is cold in myasthenia gravis, it is warm in cholinergic crisis. Secretions are normal in myasthenia gravis, and secretions are increased in cholinergic crisis. And coming to this neostigmine or hydrophonium test, which I told in my previous slide, which is also known as tensilon test. Myasthenia gravis is improved, but in cholinergic crisis, all the symptoms are aggravated. And what is the treatment protocol for myasthenia gravis? In this treatment protocol, it includes three kinds of treatment. Number one, medical treatment. Sorry. Uh, oh yeah. Number one, medical treatment. And then if it fails, we go for surgical treatment. And if it still fails, we'll go for plasmapheresis. This is a final mode of treatment for myasthenia gravis. So first, in medical treatment, we will give neostigmine that may be either oral or IM in a dose of 2 to 5 milligram. Depending on the severity, we'll give BD twice a day or TID thrice a day. And later, if patient is not responding, we'll give steroids like prednisolone. We'll start with 10 milligram per day, and we'll gradually increase up to 100 milligram per day. If we are seeing improvement in a patient, we reduce the dose. And the next, if still even with steroids and this neostigmine, if we are not seeing any improvement, we'll give immunosuppressants like azathioprine, cyclosporin. But even with the medical treatment like using neostigmine, prednisolone, immunosuppressant, if you are not feeling sufficient improvement in the patient, then we'll go for surgery, that is thymectomy. Even after thymectomy, we have to continue the medical treatment. And even after thymectomy, if you're not even after medical treatment and surgical treatment, if patient is not getting sufficient improvement, we'll go for plasmapheresis. But remember, this myasthenia gravis, it will not have like complete 100% recovery. Definitely, patient will have a small abnormalities with the involved muscles, like maybe diplopia or maybe blurring of vision or maybe difficulty in swallowing, even after treatment. He or she will not have the complete improvement at all. So that is what the thing with myasthenia gravis. So in myasthenia gravis, we covered is pathophysiology and clinical manifestations, and I told about hydrophonium test or tensilon test. This is an important short answer for you. And then coming to differences between myasthenia crisis or myasthenia gravis and cholinergic crisis. This is also one of the important short answer. And coming to treatment protocol. So here we completed this reversible okay, anticholinesterases, and we will talk about these irreversible anticholinesterases, that is OP poisoning, that is OP compounds, OP poisoning. And this is maybe this might be very important question, long answer for you. So these organo phosphate compounds, they are mainly used to kill the insects, typically in agriculture sector. So these organophosphates, what are I told what are these things? And these are acetyl choline esterase inhibitors. So what do those acetylcholinesterase inhibitors do? They increases acetylcholine at the synaptic cleft. So increased acetylcholine leads to overstimulation of acetylcholine receptors. It leads to signs and symptoms of OP poisoning. So what are the signs and symptoms of those OP compound poisoning? Means these are the signs and symptoms. It can be remembered with the mnemonic like a dumbbells, diarrhea, urination, meiosis, bradycardia, bronchospasm, excitation of skeletal muscle, and as well as excitation of CNS, which leads to convulsions and hallucinations even. I told these parasympathetic nervous system, it leads to increased secretions from all over the body. So these are the last three symptoms: increased lacrimation, increased salivation, and as well as increased sweating. So these are the typical symptoms of OP poisoning, and you remember this meiosis. We have this pinpoint people, very small constricted people in the OP poisoning cases. And we had typical bradycardia with less than 40 or 50 heart rate per minute. And then, so these are the symptoms. And coming to treatment protocol for OP poisoning, number one, we do decontamination. So completely, we should remove the clothes of the patient. And after removing the clothes, we should wash the patient with the soap and water. Completely, we should wash the patients with soap and water for 10 minutes. And then after washing, we should dispose all the clothes, and as well as that water. We should consider those clothes and water as an hazardous waste. And then next, we should monitor. We should monitor three things. Number one, obviously pulse. Number two, oxygen saturation. And number three, urinary output. We should monitor those three things. And then next, after doing decontamination, after monitoring, we'll just put IV fluids and we will give drug therapy now. So what are the drugs we use it for OP poisoning? There are two main categories. It includes atropine and as well as pralidoxin. We give those two drugs for OP poisoning. So how we give this atropine and pralidoxin? Via IV, and we will repeat this atropine uh, till atropinization. So what is this atropinization? The signs of atropinization, it includes mydriasis, which is the most common check, and then clear chest. No sounds, if we no sounds should be present if we auscultate the patient. And then definitely, I told in OP poisoning we'll have bradycardia. Here with atropinization we'll have tachycardia. That should be 80 to 100. That is a minimum thing, and it should not exceed 120. And these are the signs of atropinization. So what are the signs of atropinization? Means mydriasis, clear chest, and heart rate greater than 80 to 100, not more than 120. And coming to pralidoxin, this one might be written as PAM, and we'll give this one via IV. And these are the doses. We can give up to 1 gram, and then we'll give continuous infusion this pralidoxin. So till the patient is recovered, and then later we'll give for seizures we'll give benzodiazepines. For convulsion, in order to control the convulsions, we'll give benzodiazepines. These are the treatment protocol for OP poisoning, right? Number one, decontamination. Number two, monitoring. And number three, atropine, pralidoxin, and for seizures, we'll go benzodiazepines. And then, uh, so here we finished these cholinergic drugs, and coming to anti-muscarinic drugs. Anti-muscarinic drugs, there are like literally so many drugs. You just try to remember any two or three from these following boxes. And these are divided into natural, semi-synthetic, and as well as synthetic. Natural includes atropine, hyoscine, or scopolamine. Semi-synthetic include atropine methonitrate, homatropine, hyoscine butyl bromide, ipratropium bromide, thiotropium bromide. Synthetic compounds, it includes cyclopentate, tropicamide, oxybutynine, tolterodine, flavoxylate, dariphenacin, solifenacin. And coming to anti-Parkinsonism drugs, biperidine, benztropine, benzhexol, procyclidine. And coming to anti-secretory or antispasmodic drugs, propanthelene, oxyphenonium, glycopyrrolate, and dicyclomine, pyrenzapine, tilenzapine. All those things are like anti-secretory and antispasmodics. And here I'll be dealing about all these drugs in my coming slides. So anti-muscarinic drugs. These anti-muscarinic drugs, what are the use of those anti-muscarinic drugs? Uh, So here, these are the normal pharmacological actions of cholinergic system, which I told before. On respiratory system, it will have bronchoconstriction as well as increased secretions of mucosal glands. Definitely, we will have opposite effect with antimuscarinic, that is relief of bronchoconstriction, that may be bronchodilation and decreased secretion of mucosal glands. So here we use these anti-muscarinic drugs in three situations. Number one, asthma. Number two, COPD, and number three, as a pre-anesthetic medication. So asthma, COPD, and as a pre-anesthetic medication. For asthma, we use ipratropium bromide along with salbutamol in nebulized form. In COPD, we use ipratropium bromide and thiotropium bromide. And as a pre-anesthetic medication, we use glycopyrrolate in order to decrease the secretions. These pre-anesthetic medication, the glycopyrrolate, we actually use it when we before the invention of those non-irritant inhalation gases, anesthetic gases. But after the invention of those non-irritant inhalation anesthetic agents, we are not using this pre-anesthetic medication that much now. But still, we are using this glycopyrrolate. So these are the uses of antimuscarinic drugs in respiratory system, asthma, COPD, and pre-anesthetic medication. And coming to heart, it is this atropine. It is used in second-degree heart block, and it is used in carotid sinus syndrome and sinus bradycardia. So atropine, it increases the heart rate. So we use that one in bradycardia. And then coming to GIT, uh, it is used in three situations. Number one, peptic ulcer. Number two, in order to decrease the excessive salivation. And number three, as antispasmodics or spasmolytics. So here for peptic ulcer, we use this propanthelene. We use this propanthelene and glycopyrrolate for peptic ulcer. These are the two drugs which we used before the invention of those H2 receptor antagonists like ranitidine and proton pump inhibitors like pantoprazole. These propanthelene glycopyrrolate, these are non-specific. They act on all M1, M2, M3 receptors. So they produce more adverse drug reactions, and at the same time, these propanthelene and glycopyrrolate, they are not useful in reflex esophagitis, and at the same time, they are not useful in gastric ulcer. So for these two reasons, we are not using this propanthelene glycopyrrolate. So after those disadvantages, scientists developed drugs which are specific for M1 receptors. They are they are pyrenzapine and tilenzapine. They are specific M1 receptor antagonist. So we use that one for peptic ulcer. So what are the drugs used for peptic ulcer means propanthelene, glycopyrrolate, and pyrenzapine. And then in order to decrease the excessive salivation, next as a antispasmodics or spasmolytics, these are the GIT antispasmodics or spasmolytics. Atropine methonitrate. This atropine methonitrate, it is used in surgical condition hypertrophic pyloric stenosis, congenital hypertrophic pyloric stenosis. And then this dicyclomine is available as cyclopam. It is used for all colic pains. We generally use this dicyclomine. It is a most common drug. And coming to propanthelin, this propanthelin, it is used to treat the pain associated with diverticulitis. So propanthelin is used to reduce the pain associated with diverticulitis. So these are the GIT antispasmodics. Atropine methonitrate used in hypertrophic pyloric stenosis, congenital hypertrophic pyloric stenosis, and dicyclomine used in all colics, that may be either GIT colic or maybe renal colic. And propanthelin, it is used to treat the pain associated with diverticulitis. And coming to urinary system, these are the vesicoselective drugs: oxybutynin, tolterodine, flavoxolate, darifenacin, solifenacin. These are the vesicoselective drugs. And then coming to CNS, it is used in motion sickness. The drug which is used for motion sickness is scopolamine bromide. It is available as a tablet or subcutaneous injection or maybe transdermal patch, and it is applied just 2 hours before the journey begins, and it lasts for only for 5 to 6 hours. Suppose if your journey is extending beyond 6 hours, again you have to apply this scopolamine bromide, and this scopolamine bromide is ineffective if nausea or vomiting starts. So it is completely used as a prophylactic measure before the before starting your journey. And then coming to anti-Parkinsonism drugs, these are the drugs which we use for Parkinsonism. Benztropine, piperidine, benzahexol. These are all like you will be knowing about these drugs in detail in CNS section under Parkinsonism. And then coming to eye, what are the main therapeutic use of these antimuscarinic drugs in eye means it is used as a mydriatic, and then it is used in many inflammatory conditions like acute uveitis, keratitis, all those which are iridocyclitis. So what is the purpose of those mydriasis with antimuscarinic drugs? After doing mydriasis, it is useful for two things. Number one, for fundoscopy, and number two, it is useful to check the accuracy of the refractive errors. So those are the two uses of antimuscarinic drugs as a mydriatics, and these are the drugs which we use in ophthalmology: atropine, scopolamine, homatropine, cyclopentoate, and tropicamide. And these are the concentration of those drugs, and these are the effect of duration of effect of those drugs. So here we finished these anti-muscarinic drugs therapeutic uses. So these are the important things. Like what are the uses means: number one, asthma, COPD, and pre-anesthetic medication. What are the respective drugs? And then coming to GIT, what are the drugs we use for peptic culture, and what are the drugs we use for spasmolytics or antispasmodics. And then coming to urinary system, these are the vesicoselective drugs. And coming to CNS, the scopolamine bromide used to decrease the motion sickness and anti-Parkinsonism drugs. Coming to eye, these are the drugs. And this is a table which might be useful for you people, maybe like as a rapid glimpse before going to the exam. And then coming to atropine poisoning. This is one more important question for you, maybe either long answer or maybe short answer. So atropine poisoning, it is either suicidal or it may be either accidental. What are the doses, toxic dose of this atropine? Children, it is 10 milligram, and adults, it is 100 to 130 milligram. And what are the symptoms of those atropine poisoning? These symptoms are of two types. One because of peripheral muscarinic blockade, and two because of central effects. So these are the symptoms of atropine poisoning via this muscarinic blockade and via to central effects. So tachycardia, dry mouth, hyperpyrexia, that is increased temperature and as well as decreased sweating, urinary retention, and pupil dilatation, that is mydriasis. More pupil dilatation, more light enters into the eye, leads to photophobia, difficulty in swallowing, and rash on face and chest. And what are the central effects? Central effects are confusion, hallucinations, excitement, memory disturbances. All those things are like central effects, and delirium, even that is nothing but a confusion. So these atropine poisoning symptoms, they can be remembered as this small thing, atropine thing. Hot as hair, that is nothing but increased temperature and decreased sweating. Mad as hatter, that is confusion and delirium. Red as beetroot, because that atropine leads to vasodilatation, flushed face, and dry as a bone, because of lack of secretions. Complete skin will be like completely dry. So these are the symptoms of atropine poisoning, and these are the toxic doses of atropine. So after poisoning, so what is the treatment protocol for the atropine poisoning? So here these atropine poisoning is mainly because of muscarinic effects. So these muscarinic effects are counteracted by physostigmine or neostigmine, and we should give this physostigmine or neostigmine via slow IV, and we'll repeat this dose every 1 to 2 hours till satisfactory results are obtained. And then later, for convulsion, if patient develop convulsions, it is treated with diazepam. Definitely we will give all the supportive measures like dark room. Why we'll give dark room treatment? Because here I told it leads to photophobia, the sixth point. So this dark room, it decreases that photophobia sensation. And catheterization, why we do catheterization? Here I told in fourth point, urinary retention. In order to treat that urinary retention, we'll do catheterization and tepid sponging. What is the tepid sponging? Here I told hyperpyrexia. Hyperpyrexia means increased temperature. So in order to control that increased temperature, we'll give tepid sponging, and later we'll give this oxygen supportive oxygen treatment, and if necessary, we will give this artificial ventilation. And so here we completed this atropine poisoning event. And then coming to nursing implications of regarding that atropine. Uh, so oral atropine is usually given 30 minutes before meal. Following parenteral administration, postural hypotension develops if patient ambulates too soon if after the drug is given. And then, and for elderly patients, we should give small doses of atropine because of atropine induced tachycardia. And then later, this atropine initially, actually we know atropine, it raises the heart rate, but initially it causes bradycardia, which may last up to 1 to 3 minutes, and later it leads to tachycardia. And suppose, definitely we know this atropine, it leads to all decreased secretions. And if patient mouth is too dry, we should give sugar free chewing gum or maybe candy for some relief, or we can give some water even. And later, atropine may contribute to the problems of urinary retention. So, on initiation of therapy, establish a baseline of 24-hour urinary output so that we will be knowing what is the normal urinary output of that patient, and monitor the daily urinary output after giving the atropine. And later, increased fluid intake is must. Increased fluid intake and increased fiber intake in the diet in order to overcome the constipating effects of atropine. And inform the patient regarding the drug may increase the heat stroke by suppressing the heat loss. So therefore, we should ask the patient not to do heavy work and not to go outside uh, during afternoon time. And then later, these atropine derivatives, or atropine semi-synthetic or synthetic derivatives, which we use topically on eye, they should be discontinued in the following situations. Number one, when the patient develops eye pain, or when the patient develops dizziness or palpitations because of systemic absorption of those drugs. So we should discontinue them. And later, and the last one is this atropine is a very light sensitive one, so it should be preserved in a light resistant containers. And these are the nursing implications for atropine. So here we finished uh, completely about antimuscarinic drugs. So I told in antimuscarinic drugs, uh, this classification, and I told all those pharmacological actions as well as therapeutic uses. So all those therapeutic uses in system wise, respiratory, heart, and then coming to GIT. And in GIT, I told drugs you use it for peptic ulcer in order to decrease excessive salivation and antispasmodics. And coming to vasicoselective drugs which act on bladder. And coming to CNS, acting on the useful for motion sickness and useful in Parkinsonism disease. And coming to eye, it acts as a mydriatic and useful in inflammatory conditions. And what are the drugs we use in ophthalmology? Antimuscarinic drugs used in ophthalmology. And I told about atropine poisoning. And then before we completed these parasympato mimetic drugs, there are of two types: directly acting, indirectly acting. And directly acting, nothing much about directly acting. Indirect acting, we spoke about reversible and irreversible. Irreversible, I told organophosphorus compound poisoning, and reversible, I told all the therapeutic uses of those reversible anticholinesterases, and I spoke in detail about this myasthenia gravis, right? And then we spoke about those acetylcholine, and I spoke about these pharmacological actions, and then I spoke about these cholinergic receptors, and then we finished the synthesis of acetylcholine. So here we finished this cholinergic and anti-muscarinic drugs. Thank you.